You know, when we think about the Maratha Empire, we tend to picture this single massive power that just dominated India. But honestly, that's not the whole story. The real engine behind the empire wasn't some single throne in Pune. Nope, it was a confederacy, a group of incredibly powerful families who, through their own ambition and courage, really shaped its destiny. So, let's get into the real story of these pillars of the empire.
So this right here, this is the Bhagwa Jhanda, the iconic saffron banner of the Marathas. For more than a century, this flag represented a force that seemed absolutely unstoppable. It stretched from the southern coasts all the way up to the plains of the north. This was the symbol of an empire at the absolute peak of its power.
Well, you gotta ask, right? Who were the people behind the banner? Who were the generals, the rulers, and the statesmen who were actually out there expanding the empire, managing these huge territories, and becoming the very pillars that held the whole thing up? We're going to zoom in on four of the most influential families. You've got the Holkars of Indore, the Shindes of Gwalior, the Bhosales of Nagpur, and the Gaikwads of Vadodara. Now, we'll mostly focus on the first three, but you have to understand, these families weren't just taking orders. They were basically rival power centers, and each one played a huge part in shaping the empire's fate. All right, so our story kicks off with that first big push, the expansion into the north. This was the era of legendary generals, leaders who took the fight deep into enemy territory and planted the Maratha flag where it had never flown before. First up, we have Malhar Rao Holkar, the founder of the Holkar dynasty in Indore. This guy was an absolute master of the classic Maratha tactic, guerrilla warfare, fighting under the legendary Peshwa Bajirao I. He was a key player in carving out the northern frontier, establishing Maratha dominance all across Malwa and Rajputana. At the exact same time, another heavy hitter was making waves, Arahuji Bhosale of Nagpur. He was known as the bravest and most capable leader of his family. And let me tell you, his ambitions weren't just limited to the north. He was pushing the empire's borders out in every single direction. And just look at this. It really gives you a sense of the sheer scale of his success. He marched his armies deep into the south, grabbing key territories like Tiruchirappalli. But his real masterstroke was in the east. He secured what were called Chatai rights, which is basically the right to collect 1/4 of all the tax revenue from Bengal, Bihar, and Odisha. I mean, that effectively put these huge, super wealthy regions right under Maratha financial control. And if you want a perfect example of the kind of power we're talking about, check this out. The Bhosales of Nagpur were so feared that the British over in Kolkata literally dug a giant ditch around their city, just in case of an attack. It became famous as the Maratha Ditch. I mean, come on, when your enemies are digging trenches to hide from you, you know you've made your point.
But, building an empire isn't all about battles and conquest. Over in Indore, a completely different kind of strength was taking shape, all thanks to one of the most remarkable rulers of the 18th century, a leader whose power came from good governance and creating peace. This is Ahilyabai Holkar. Her story is incredible. She came to power after a double tragedy. First, her husband died in battle, and then her father-in-law, the great Malhar Rao, passed away soon after. In an age totally dominated by warrior kings, this queen was about to show everyone a completely different way to wield power. And what she accomplished was just astounding. She wasn't a warrior, she was a builder. She completely reformed tax laws to help out farmers, she boosted trade and industry, and she kicked off this massive public works program, building wells, tanks, and temples all across India. She even personally oversaw legal cases to make sure her people got a fair shake. And look, this assessment from her own time really says it all. For almost 30 years, she ruled not with a sword, but with wisdom and foresight. The peace and prosperity she brought to her kingdom did wonders for the Maratha reputation across India. She proved that building an empire was every bit as important as conquering one. But while Indore was thriving under Ahilyabai, the rest of the empire was heading straight for a crisis. A total, catastrophic defeat left the Maratha name shattered in the north. And it was from these very ashes that one man would rise to become the most powerful figure in all of India. So the Third Battle of Panipat, it was an absolute disaster for the Marathas, a total catastrophe. Their army was crushed, their best generals were killed, and just like that, their dominance in North India completely vanished. The empire's very survival was on the line. And this is where Mahadaji Shinde steps onto the scene. He'd actually survived the disaster at Panipat, so he was a hardened general, but he was also a brilliant statesman. He made it his personal mission to restore Maratha glory. But he knew the old ways of doing things just weren't going to cut it anymore.
This led to a huge shift in strategy. Mahadaji realized something absolutely crucial. The old Maratha guerrilla tactics that worked so well in the hills of the Deccan were failing miserably on the wide-open plains of the north. So he did something revolutionary for the time. He hired European experts, like the Frenchman Benoit de Boyne, to train a modern, disciplined army, complete with a powerful artillery corps.
So with this new modernized force, Mahadji Scindia launched this systematic campaign to bring back Maratha dominance. He started taking down his rivals one by one, the Rohillas, the Jats, the Rajputs. He even put a check on the growing ambitions of the British. The whole campaign climaxed with a march on Delhi, where he put the powerless Mughal emperor under his protection. And this was his masterstroke. As a thank you, the emperor gave him the title of Vakili Mutlak, which basically means regent of the empire. Now, this wasn't just some fancy title. We're talking about total control. It gave Mahadji, and through him the Marathas, complete authority over what was left of the Mughal Empire's government and military. He had become the ultimate kingmaker, the real power behind the throne.
For the rest of his life, Mahadaji Shinde was essentially the man controlling Indian politics. He didn't just revive the Maratha name, he raised it to a level of power it had never seen before. This memorial in Pune is a testament to the man who single-handedly brought an empire back from the brink.
But here's the thing about empires built by larger-than-life figures. What happens when they're gone? In the final chapter of the Maratha story, the very pillars that had held the empire up for so long finally began to crack.
Back in Pune at Shaniwarwada, the administrative heart of the empire, things started to fall apart. With titans like Mahadaji and Ahilyabai gone, a huge power vacuum opened up. The central leadership got weak, and the whole confederation just descended into infighting.
Look, it wasn't just one thing that brought them down. It was like a perfect storm. The Sardar families, who were once united, started fighting amongst themselves for power. The leadership from the Peshwas in Pune was weak and ineffective. And then, in a desperate move, one guy, Raghunathra, actually went to the British for help to become Peshwa. That was the fatal mistake. He basically opened the door for an enemy that was more than happy to come in and exploit all the chaos.
In the end, it was swift. By 1817, it was over. The British captured Pune. They took down the Maratha banner and hoisted the Union Jack over Shaniwarwada. The Maratha Empire, which had dominated India for over a century, was officially gone. And this leaves us with a huge, lingering question. The Marathas were the last major Indian power that really could have challenged the British. And their downfall, when you really look at it, wasn't just a military loss. It was a failure of unity. So you have to wonder, what if? What if these powerful families, the very pillars of the empire, had managed to stand together? Could the entire history of modern India have been written differently?